A courtroom clash erupts as Justice Amy Coney Barrett grills Elon Musk over his platform's defiance of FCC rules. But Musk's bold counterattack exposes government overreach, setting the stage for a historic legal battle. The air in the Supreme Court chamber was thick with tension, the kind that makes your pulse quicken before a single word is spoken. It was April 26, 2025, and the marble pillars seemed to loom larger than usual, as if bracing for the storm about to unfold. At the center of it all stood Elon Musk, the billionaire innovator whose social media platform, X, had become a lightning rod for controversy. The Federal Communications Commission had hauled him before the nation's highest court, accusing X of flouting federal regulations designed to curb misinformation and protect public discourse. The FCC's case was clear. X's refusal to comply with content moderation mandates was a direct threat to democratic order. But Musk wasn't here to apologize. He was here to fight. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, known for her sharp intellect and unflinching commitment to constitutional principles, leaned forward in her chair, her gaze piercing through the packed courtroom. She was the one to watch today. Her questions were expected to cut deep, especially given her recent writings on the balance between free speech and regulatory authority. The other justices sat in stoic silence, but Barrett's presence dominated. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice steady but laced with an edge, "your platform has repeatedly ignored directives from the FCC. Do you believe you're above the law?" The question landed like a gavel, and a murmur rippled through the gallery. Legal analysts scribbled furiously, sensing blood in the water. Musk, dressed in a tailored black suit, didn't flinch. His eyes, often described as restless, were locked on Barrett with an intensity that matched her own. He'd been preparing for this moment for months, diving into constitutional law with the same obsessive focus he'd once applied to rocket engineering. "Justice Barrett," he replied, his voice calm but resonant, "I'm not above the law, but the FCC's directives are. They violate the First Amendment, and I'm here to prove it." The courtroom froze. Even the justices, accustomed to bold arguments, seemed caught off guard by his audacity. This wasn't the erratic showman the media often portrayed. This was a man armed with a plan. The FCC's lead counsel, a seasoned litigator named Margaret Voss, rose to outline their case. She painted X as a digital Wild West, where unchecked misinformation had fueled division and distrust. "Mr. Musk's platform," she argued, "has become a haven for dangerous rhetoric, and his refusal to cooperate with federal oversight undermines the public good." Her words were measured, but the subtext was clear. Musk was a reckless maverick who needed to be reined in. She cited a litany of regulations, from the Communications Act of 1934 to recent amendments, that empowered the FCC to enforce compliance. The gallery nodded along, and for a moment it seemed the government held the upper hand. But Musk wasn't rattled. As Voss concluded, he stepped to the podium, a stack of documents at his side. "The FCC's case," he began, "rests on a flawed premise that the government can dictate what's said on a private platform without violating the Constitution." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then, in a move that stunned the room, he cited a 2021 opinion authored by Barrett herself, one that emphasized the primacy of free speech in the face of regulatory overreach. "As Justice Barrett wrote," he said, quoting verbatim, "the government cannot use its authority to silence dissent under the guise of public safety." The gallery gasped. Barrett's expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed slightly as if reassessing her opponent. Musk's argument was methodical, almost surgical. He dissected the FCC's regulations, arguing they were vague and overbroad, designed not to protect, but to control. He pointed to historical precedents, cases like Brandenburg versus Ohio and Reno ver ACLU, that shielded speech from government interference. The justices, even those skeptical of Musk's public persona, leaned in, their pens poised. This wasn't just a defense. It was a counteroffensive. The FCC's case, Musk contended, wasn't about misinformation, but about power. They want to decide what's true, he said, his voice rising. That's not regulation. That's censorship. As the session broke for recess, the courtroom buzzed with disbelief. Legal analysts whispered about Musk's unexpected command of the law, while Barrett conferred quietly with her colleagues. The FCC's team huddled, their confidence shaken. Outside, reporters scrambled to file breaking news alerts. Musk turns tables on FCC in Supreme Court stunner. But the day was far from over. Musk had landed a blow, but Barrett wasn't done with him yet. Her next question, everyone knew, could change everything. The Supreme Court chamber pulsed with anticipation as the recess ended. Reporters, their laptops glowing in the dim gallery, typed furiously, their headlines already framing the morning's shock. Elon Musk, the tech titan, had outmaneuvered the FCC's legal team with a command of constitutional law that left even seasoned analysts reeling. But the atmosphere was far from celebratory. Justice Amy Coney Barrett's steely gaze signaled the battle was only beginning. Her whispered exchange with Justice Gorsuch during the break had set tongues wagging. Whatever she was planning, it was going to be sharp. As the justices filed back in, the room fell silent, every eye on Barrett. Musk stood at the podium, his posture relaxed but his jaw set, like a boxer waiting for the next round. Barrett didn't waste time. "Mr. Musk," she said, her voice cutting through the hush, "you've quoted my opinion to argue the FCC's regulations infringe on free speech. But what of the government's duty to protect the public from harm? Your platform's unchecked content has been linked to real-world consequences. How do you reconcile that with your absolutist view?" The question was a trap, layered with moral weight and legal nuance. The gallery held its breath. Musk didn't blink. "Justice Barrett, the harm you speak of is real, but the solution isn't censorship. It's more speech." His voice was steady, but there was fire in his eyes. The FCC's approach assumes the public can't be trusted to think for themselves. They want to filter truth through a government lens. That's not protection, it's control. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the podium. "My platform amplifies voices, not just the ones the government likes. If that's messy, it's because freedom is." The room stirred, a mix of admiration and unease. Barrett's expression remained unreadable, but her pen tapped once, a rare tell. The FCC's counsel, Margaret Voss, seized the moment to counter. Rising with a stack of reports, she painted a grim picture. X's algorithms, she argued, prioritized sensationalism, amplifying falsehoods that fueled unrest. "Mr. Musk's rhetoric about freedom ignores the chaos his platform enables," she said, her tone icy. "The FCC's regulations are a measured response to a clear danger." She cited data, incidents of violence allegedly tied to online misinformation, and leaned hard into the government's authority to regulate communications. "The First Amendment isn't a blank check," she snapped, glaring at Musk. The justices nodded, some visibly swayed. Musk wasn't fazed. He'd anticipated this. "Ms. Voss," he said, turning to her with a hint of a smile, "your data is selective, and your argument is slippery." He produced a chart, projected for the court, showing how X's user engagement dwarfed traditional media, yet its impact on violence was statistically negligible. "The FCC cherry-picks incidents to justify overreach," he said. "They're not regulating harm. They're regulating speech they don't like." Then, in a daring move, he cited a 1997 case, Reno versus ACLU, where the court struck down similar regulations for stifling online expression. "The internet isn't a newspaper," he said. "It's a public square. The FCC can't gatekeep it. The Room erupted in murmurs. Justice Kagan raised an eyebrow, while Justice Thomas scribbled notes. Barrett, however, wasn't ready to let Musk off. "You speak of public squares, Mr. Musk," she said, her voice now laced with challenge. "But your platform isn't neutral. Its algorithms shape what's seen. Isn't that a form of control, one you wield without accountability?" The question was a dagger, aimed at the heart of Musk's defense. The gallery leaned forward, sensing a turning point. Even Musk's legal team seated behind him exchanged tense glances. Musk paused, not out of uncertainty but to let the question hang. "Every platform makes choices," he admitted, his tone measured. "But unlike the FCC, we don't silence voices based on their politics. Our algorithms evolve with user input, not government mandates." He leaned into the podium, his voice rising. "If you want accountability, look at the FCC's vague rules, enforced by unelected bureaucrats. That's the real unchecked power." The boldness of his words stunned the room. Barrett's eyes locked on his, a silent duel unfolding. The session adjourned for lunch. The courtroom buzzed with a new energy. Reporters swarmed the exits, their updates now framing Musk as a formidable adversary. Barrett's question lingered like a storm cloud, and Musk's response had only raised the stakes. The FCC's team huddled again, Voss's face tight with frustration. Outside, X's users flooded the platform with posts, hailing Musk as a champion of free speech. But the day's biggest moment was still to come. Barrett was preparing a follow-up that could unravel everything. The Supreme Court's lunch recess ended, but the electric charge in the chamber hadn't dissipated. Reporters, their fingers still flying across keyboards, had turned the morning's clash into a global spectacle, with headlines screaming of Musk's defiance and Barrett's unrelenting scrutiny. The gallery was packed, spectators craning their necks as the justices returned, their black robes a stark contrast to the storm brewing. Justice Amy Coney Barrett's earlier question about X's algorithmic control hung over the room, a challenge. Musk had parried but not fully answered. Her next move, whispered about during the break, promised to test him like never before. Barrett didn't hesitate. As the session resumed, she fixed her gaze on Musk, who stood at the podium, his face a mask of calm resolve. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice carrying a quiet menace, "you argue that your platform's algorithms are a response to user input, not control. Yet evidence suggests X amplifies divisive content to drive engagement. How is that not manipulation, undermining the very free speech you champion?" The question was surgical, slicing into the heart of Musk's defense. The gallery stirred, sensing blood. Even Justice Alito, usually reserved, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Musk took a breath, his mind racing. He'd known Barrett would double down, but the precision of her attack was unnerving. "Justice Barrett," he said, his voice steady but deliberate. "Amplification isn't censorship. X's algorithms reflect what users engage with, not what I dictate." He paused, then leaned into the podium, his tone sharpening. "If the court believes reflecting user behavior is manipulation, then every newspaper, every broadcaster, every town hall is guilty of the same. The FCC doesn't regulate those. Why target X?" The room buzzed. His counterpunch was bold, but Barrett's expression didn't flicker. She was waiting for more. Margaret Voss, the FCC's counsel, sensed an opening. Rising with a stack of internal X documents, leaked, she claimed, by a whistleblower, she painted a damning picture. "Mr. Musk's platform," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "prioritizes outrage over truth. These documents show X's algorithms were tweaked to boost polarizing posts, knowing they'd spark conflict." She held up a memo, allegedly from X's engineering team, detailing how engagement spikes drove revenue. "This isn't a public square," she snapped. "It's a machine designed to inflame." The justices exchanged glances, and the gallery murmured. Voss's evidence was a gut punch. Musk's legal team tensed, but he remained unfazed. "Ms. Voss," he said, his voice now carrying a quiet menace, "those documents are out of context, and you know it." He produced his own evidence, a sworn affidavit from X's chief engineer, clarifying that the memo referred to A/B testing, not deliberate manipulation. "We test features to improve user experience," Musk said, his eyes locked on Voss. "Every tech company does. The FCC's cherry-picked leaks are a distraction from their real goal, controlling speech they can't rebut." He turned to the justices, his voice rising. "They're not protecting the public. They're protecting their own power." The room erupted in whispers. Justice Kavanaugh scribbled furiously, while Justice Sotomayor raised an eyebrow. Barrett, however, wasn't swayed. "Mr. Musk," she said, her tone now icy, "you dodge the core issue. If your platform's design inflames division, doesn't that undermine the democratic discourse you claim to protect?" The question was a masterstroke, forcing Musk to confront the consequences of his creation. The gallery leaned in, every word a potential turning point. Even Musk's supporters in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Musk didn't flinch, but his response was measured, almost introspective. "Democracy is messy, Justice Barrett," he said. "X reflects that messiness, not because we engineer it, but because people are divided. The FCC's solution, silencing speech, doesn't fix division. It buries it." He cited a 2018 case, Packingham v. North Carolina, where the court upheld the Internet's role as a vital forum for debate. "The First Amendment," he said, "protects the right to disagree, even when it's ugly." His words landed with weight, but Barrett's silence was deafening. She was building to something bigger. As the session paused for a brief procedural discussion, the courtroom hummed with tension. Reporters dashed off updates, framing Musk's defiance as both brilliant and reckless. Voss huddled with her team, her face a mask of determination. Outside, X's platform exploded with hashtags rallying behind Musk, while critics called him a danger to democracy. Barrett, conferring with her colleagues, was clearly unsatisfied. Her next question, whispered about in the gallery, was rumored to be a bombshell that could shift the entire case. The Supreme Court chamber crackled with anticipation as the procedural pause ended. The brief lull had only heightened the stakes, with whispered speculations about Justice Amy Coney Barrett's next move spreading like wildfire through the gallery. Reporters, their screens glowing, churned out real-time updates, torn between Musk's audacious defense and the FCC's relentless assault. Margaret Voss, the FCC's counsel, stood with her team, her eyes burning with resolve to reclaim the narrative. Outside, X's platform was a battleground of hashtags, with free speech fighter trending alongside her Musk menace. But inside, all eyes were on Barrett, whose dissatisfaction was palpable. Her next question, the gallery sensed, could redefine the case. As the justices settled, Barrett's gaze locked onto Musk, who stood at the podium, his expression a mix of defiance and focus. "Mr. Musk," she said, her voice low but piercing, "you claim X's design reflects democratic messiness, yet you control a platform that shapes public perception on a global scale. If the government cannot regulate such power, who checks you?" The question was a thunderbolt, striking at the core of Musk's empire and his philosophy. It wasn't just legal, it was personal, challenging his role as a steward of public discourse. The gallery gasped, and even Justice Gorsuch, usually impassive, leaned forward. Musk's jaw tightened, but his response was swift. "Justice Barrett," he said, his voice steady but charged, "no one elected the FCC to play truth police. My platform's power comes from users, not a bureaucracy. If I overstep, the market, billions of voices, checks me." He leaned into the podium, his eyes flashing. "The FCC isn't seeking balance. They're seeking control. They want to regulate X not because it's too powerful, but because it's too free. The room stirred, a mix of awe and skepticism. Barrett's expression remained stone, but her pen paused, a subtle sign she was listening. Voss pounced, sensing vulnerability. "Mr. Musk's talk of markets is a deflection," she said, her voice sharp as she brandished a new exhibit. A study, linking X's content to eroded trust in institutions. His platform's unchecked power destabilizes democracy itself, she argued. The FCC's regulations are a firewall against this chaos, grounded in decades of precedent. She cited the Fairness Doctrine's legacy, framing the FCC's role as a protector of public interest. "Mr. Musk's refusal to comply," she said, glaring at him, "is not principle, it's profiteering." The justices nodded, some visibly persuaded, and the gallery murmured. Voss's attack was fierce, painting Musk as a reckless opportunist. Musk didn't waver. "Ms. Voss," he said, his tone now edged with disdain, "your study blames X for distrust that predates it. People don't trust institutions because of platforms. They trust platforms because institutions have failed them." He produced a counter-exhibit, a timeline showing declining public trust in government long before X's rise. "The FCC's regulations," he said, "aren't about protecting democracy. They're about protecting a status quo that's lost its legitimacy." Then, in a bold move, he cited Barrett's own dissent in a 2023 case, where she warned against government overreach in digital spaces. "As Justice Barrett wrote," he said, "the state cannot assume the role of arbiter without risking tyranny." The gallery erupted in whispers. Barrett's eyes narrowed, but a flicker of respect crossed her face. The tension was electric, but Barrett wasn't done. "Mr. Musk," she said, her voice now a razor, "you invoke my words, but you avoid accountability. If X's power is unchecked, what stops you from becoming the arbiter you decry?" The question was a gauntlet, forcing Musk to confront his own influence. The room fell silent, every word a potential pivot. Musk's legal team exchanged tense glances, and even his staunchest supporters in the gallery held their breath. Musk paused, not from doubt, but to let the weight settle. "I'm not perfect," he said, his voice quieter but resolute. "But I'd rather trust billions of users to shape discourse than a handful of regulators to dictate it. X isn't a gatekeeper, it's a mirror." He cited a 2019 case, Manhattan, Community Access Corp. v. Halleck, affirming private platforms' First Amendment rights. "The court has already ruled," he said, "that private entities aren't the government's proxies. The FCC's trying to rewrite that." His words resonated, but Barrett's silence was ominous, her mind clearly turning. As the session broke for the day, the courtroom buzzed with a fevered intensity. Reporters scrambled to file stories, framing Musk's performance as a high-wire act of genius and risk. Voss's team huddled, their frustration mounting as they planned their final push. Outside, X's platform surged with support for Musk, but critics grew louder, warning of unchecked tech power. Barrett, retreating to her chambers, was already drafting her final question, one that could tip the scales and reshape the future of free speech. The Supreme Court. Chamber was a pressure cooker as the final session dawned on April 27, 2025. The previous day's clash had left the nation on edge, with reporters' dispatches fueling a firestorm of debate. Elon Musk's daring defense of X had captivated supporters who flooded the platform with praise, while critics decried his influence as a threat to democracy. Margaret Voss, the FCC's counsel, had spent the night recalibrating, her team's resolve hardened for a last stand. But the spotlight was on Justice Amy Coney Barrett, whose rumored final question hung over the courtroom like a guillotine. As the justices took their seats, the gallery's silence was deafening. Every spectator braced for a historic reckoning. Barrett wasted no time. her eyes, sharp and unyielding, fixed on Musk as he stood at the podium, his posture betraying a flicker of fatigue, but no surrender. "Mr. Musk," she said, her voice ablade, "you position X as a mirror of public will, yet its reach shapes that will. If neither you nor the government can be trusted to regulate this power, where does the line lie between freedom and chaos?" The question was a masterpiece, forcing Musk to bridge principle and pragmatism. The gallery leaned forward, hearts pounding. Even Chief Justice Roberts, usually stoic, tilted his head, awaiting the response. Musk took a breath, his mind racing. Through months of preparation. "Justice Barrett," he began, his voice steady but resonant, "freedom isn't chaos. It's the foundation of truth. X's power lies in its openness, not in my control." He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "The line is simple. The government can protect without silencing. The FCC's regulations cross that line, demanding censorship under the guise of order." Then, in a daring flourish, he cited a 1969 case, Tinker versus Des Moines, where the court upheld symbolic speech against government suppression. "As this court ruled," he said, "freedom of expression is the matrix of all other freedoms. X upholds that matrix." The room stirred, a ripple of awe spreading. Barrett's pen paused, her face unreadable. Voss rose, her face taut with determination. "Mr. Musk's idealism is a smokescreen," she said, her voice cutting. "X's unchecked influence distorts truth, not reveals it." She brandished a final exhibit, a report alleging X's role in amplifying foreign disinformation. "The FCC's regulations," she argued, "are a shield against external threats, not a gag on speech." Her words were fierce, framing Musk as naive at best, complicit at worst. "This court must uphold the government's duty to safeguard democracy," she concluded, her stare boring into Musk. The justices nodded, some swayed, and the gallery murmured. Voss's salvo was a desperate bid to reclaim the narrative. Musk's response was electric. "Ms. Voss," he said, his tone icy, "your report exaggerates threats to justify control. X fights disinformation with transparency. Users flag falsehoods, not bureaucrats." He produced a final piece of evidence. X's public audit, showing robust content moderation without government mandates. "The FCC doesn't want safety," he said, his voice rising. "They want veto power over speech." He turned to the justices, his words a plea and a challenge. "This court has protected speech against overreach before. Do it again." The gallery erupted in whispers, and even Justice Kagan, a skeptic, scribbled intently. Barrett, unmoved, pressed further. "Mr. Musk, your audit is voluntary. What guarantees its permanence?" The question was a final test, probing Musk's commitment. He didn't hesitate. "My word," he said, "and the trust of billions who use X. If I break that trust, I lose them. That's accountability no regulation can match." His sincerity was palpable, and for the first time Barrett's expression softened, a hint of respect breaking through. Weeks later, the court's ruling came. A 6-3 decision striking down the FCC's regulations as unconstitutional overreach. Barrett's majority opinion echoed Musk's arguments, citing the First Amendment's primacy and warning against government control of digital platforms. The decision was a seismic victory for Musk, redefining the boundaries of free speech. In the digital age, X's platform exploded with celebration, while the FCC faced a reckoning, its authority curtailed. Musk, once dismissed as a provocateur, emerged as a legal titan, his reputation transformed. Outside the court he addressed a sea of reporters, his voice calm but triumphant. "This isn't my win," he said. "It's yours. The people's." The crowd roared, and for a moment the marble pillars seemed to stand taller, bearing witness to a new era of freedom.